serving Westchester and the Hudson Valley. Now, Newsmakers.
You're watching Newsmakers here on News 12. I'm Brian Conybeare. Welcome back. Today, our guest is White Plains attorney Al Piro. After all his trials and tribulations, he's back in business, now taking on a very high-profile local case pro bono. That means for free. He's representing more than 140 retired White Plains police officers who are now suing the city over a move to begin charging them 15% of their health care coverage costs. The lawsuit filed in state Supreme Court back in June claims a breach of contract and demands the city go back to paying the entire premiums. And the city made the move, they said, to save taxpayers money in the midst of a budget crisis and the recession. But the officers say a deal is a deal. And just last month, a federal judge did block the city from forcing the officers to pay up. So that, at this point, was seen as a victory for you, don't you think? The judge said, stop, they don't have to pay yet, let's hash this out in court. Is that where it stands right now?
It was a very significant decision, getting the preliminary injunction. And that is where it stands right now. Of course, there are motions going back and forth at this point. And while the motions are going back and forth and the lawyers are, lawyering, what we're doing is we are conducting a significant investigation of all of the facts, collecting affidavits, and preparing for the ultimate trial on the merits.
The retirees were asked to pay 15% of the premiums, but my understanding was it was only retirees who were hired after July 1, 1995. Is that how it works?
Prior.
Prior. They were hired, yes. Those are the ones who were forced to pay.
Yes.
And contracts use that date for some reasons. I read some of the PBA contracts from White Plains. What's the significance of that date?
Well, the significance of the date is that there were various changes under the retirement laws in New York State. There were changes under the civil service law in New York State. And the city had selected that date because that was an operative date for them in terms of other contracts that they were negotiating with the CSCA and other individuals.
That's the beginning of the fiscal year for most cities as well.
And the beginning of the fiscal year.
To be clear to people out there, most White Plains police officers and retirees do pay some of their health care costs. The schedule, according to one contract I saw, if you have 20-plus years with the city and you're retired, you pay nothing. If you're 15 to 19 years, you pay 20% of your coverage. 10 to 15 years, 50% of your coverage. And less than 10 years as a retiree, you pay 100%. Is that still in place? Is that where we stand now, or is that an old contract?
That only applies to employees who were hired subsequent to July 1, 1995. Okay. Just to give you a quick overview, because there's a lot about this case that would bore your viewers.
I've read most of it, and you're right.
But the fact of the matter is this. In our case, all of our plaintiffs, 144 or 46 or whatever there is, were hired prior to July 1, 1995. So they had the right to receive 100% of the payment of health care benefits under two parallel courses of conduct by the city. One, the city adopted resolutions and enactments in which they clearly stated that they would pay 100% of these benefits. In addition to that, there were all of these collective bargaining agreements which, standing alone, provided in a clause called the General Provisions Clause, which incorporated by reference all of these other rights, entitlements, and benefits.
The city argues that that catch-all provision doesn't apply to retired officers, just current active PBA members. You disagree?
Well, not only do I disagree, but it's interesting because just yesterday, and it's a document that just went into court, I happened to get delivered to me by someone a benefit book for 2010 for the city of White Plains, and it states unequivocally the city pays 100% of the health care retirement benefit for retirees. And, the city is trying to justify their activity, but the fact of the matter is they know, and I know, that the best evidence of intent is what the parties did. And there is no question that from at least 1970 through the present date, they have paid 100% of these benefits. So,
as a taxpayer, one might argue, look, we're getting hammered, there's a recession on, and the city's trying to cut costs. I don't have a problem with that. Joe taxpayer would say, I have a job, I kick into my health insurance, why don't these people, instead of doing it on the backs of the cost of my home? And we're seeing in places like Yonkers and White Plains, firefighters being laid off, police officers being laid off. What do you say to the taxpayers out there who are just saying, please do something to cut these costs, and if those guys got to kick in, so be it?
yeah, I understand the argument, and it's certainly been well chronicled. There's a slew of literature out there, publications, magazine articles, talking about this issue. I think that probably the public sentiment, not understanding a lot of important distinctions, are saying, hey, government is too big, let's get rid of government, let's start cutting back on these benefits, these people are getting too much. A lot of these people have second jobs at this point, they're making money. And the arguments, frankly, are very interesting, and they certainly have merit to them in some cases. But you have to remember that the group that I'm representing, the retired police officers, started at $6,000 and $7,000 a year. They were promised these benefits in order to give up jobs in the private sector to come to work in the public sector.
And that made it attractive to them.
And what made it attractive to them was the fact that they could put in their years of service and get this deferred compensation. So maybe a young man or a young woman, 20 years old, 25 years old, says, hey, let me go put in my 20 years, I'll be 45, I'll have my health care benefits for life, I'll have a pension, and at that point, I can go back to school, I can start another career. Some of these people are enjoying their fishing and golf. Others are teaching and doing other things. The problem with the health care system and the retirement benefits, if I may, is that it's not the officers, not that group. It's the commissioners, it's the political appointees, it's the political cronies that are in there at the appointment of the mayors and the other people who put in their 4 or 5 years or their last 3 years and get that $125,000 a year.
Well, certainly a lot of officers and firefighters have been accused of pension padding, and right now the state attorney general is looking into that, and people who are over the last year or 2 or 3 years padding their pension, and I think that's working against public sentiment for your case, isn't it?
And it should, well, it should be working against public sentiment because it's wrong. And I think that, however, the distinction must be made that with regard to people who were not part of that process, these people are long gone from government. They were not part of those types of activities. And I think that they are clearly a distinct group. And I think that the city has to honor its promise.
All right. I greatly appreciate your time, Al Piero. Always interesting, always colorful. Good luck in the case. We'll see how it comes out in court, of course. Good luck to the city of White Plains. They're on the opposite side. We'll see what happens. I appreciate your sitting here and being candid with us.
Thanks, Brian. Good seeing you again.
Thank you. Good to see you. That's all the time we have for this edition of Newsmakers. I'm Brian Conybeare. I told you it was going to be an interesting discussion. The guy's led a fascinating life. We'll let you know what happens with the White Plains case and if it will have ramifications for other cases around the state. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time here on Newsmakers. More regular local news is coming up on News 12.